Hello and welcome to the Dissect and Connect podcast. I'm your host, Mike Wade. This is the podcast where we explore population health issues impacting your community. Dissect and Connect is a service of New River Valley Community Services and the Montgomery County Prevention Partners. Dr. Mary Crozier has been in the field of substance abuse education, prevention, and intervention for over 40 years. She has worked in 2 behavioral health offices as a prevention provider before moving to college prevention and teaching. Dr. Crozier is a founding member of 2 community coalitions, and as a retired academic, she currently consults with 3 prevention coalitions: the Virginia Beach Youth and Community Action Team, Community Coalitions of Virginia, and the Virginia Allies Evaluating Drug Legislation. So, Dr. Crozier, welcome to the Dissect and Connect podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I gave the audience a little bit of an introduction about you with the start of the show, but I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Certainly. So I attended 3 state universities here in Virginia and received 4 degrees. I've served in 2 substance abuse prevention behavioral health centers over my 40 years of service, and worked at the College of William and Mary Student Health Center for a decade or more, and I've served as a college professor at several institutions in U.S. and in Canada.
So you currently also consult with SACOVA, the Community Coalitions of Virginia organization. Could you tell our listeners who aren't familiar with SACOVA a little bit more about that group and its mission?
Yeah, good idea. So Community Coalitions of Virginia is a statewide coalition of all kinds of community coalitions, organizations, businesses, educators, just a number of different state, local, and colleagues. So right now we've got about 50 different groups that are involved in SACOVA. We've been going since 2008 with very humble beginnings, and now just lots of success, collaborating, conferences, promoting local as well as statewide initiatives. So SACOVA also helps with legislative work, really tries to funnel the community efforts into really targeted state legislative work and state initiatives. We've tried to help with data collection. We've tried to address the opioid crisis and looked at energy drinks, alcohol, and certainly the marijuana issue over our lifespan here. And so right now, SACOVA is a 501c3, and we're collaborating regularly with Virginia Department of Behavioral Health Disability Services.
So what does a strong and effective community coalition look like exactly?
That's a great question, and that's one that I love teaching about when I had my prevention course for master's level students. So a strong coalition is able to really garner participation from all different sectors of the community. So that would include your concerned citizen volunteers like parents, grandparents, and non-parents. That would include professionals from agencies like behavioral health, public health, social services, recreation, courts, human services, etc. Coalitions are famous for including personnel and students from K through 16. We don't have any kindergarten students involved necessarily, but we try to get professionals from that represent the young students as well as up through college. And coalitions would partner with business, military, law enforcement, government, media, the recovering community, etc. So it's great to have a depth and breadth of participation and to really try to inspire motivation so that over time coalitions can reach all these goals with really evidence-based strategies. So not just what we think will work or what feels right or what's going to look pretty. We really need to roll up our sleeves and use the evidence-based strategies that are going to reduce the risk factors and then promote those protective factors in our specific community. So effective coalitions have a sense of shared leadership, and ideally there's a matching of resources among the local, state, and federal levels. There's an ability to deliver these programs to universal, selective, and indicated populations. So again, the whole spectrum. And there should be flexibility to respond to any emerging needs. Maybe unexpected issues pop up, or a new substance gets trafficked into town and we have to somehow get a PSA out about it. So as much as we try to be, flexible, it's also imperative that coalitions have this tenacity to sustain long-term commitments, because change, especially on a systems level, takes time. It takes a lot of patience. So we need to be in it for the long run. Yeah. Yeah.
No overnight successes.
That's right. That's right.
With that in mind, what are the advantages to communities in having effective coalitions? How does that benefit a community if they have a strong coalition?
Yeah, good question, because, if you can get a whole spectrum of the community to participate, then you can try to expand the existing services. So those existing prevention, intervention, treatment services, you can try to write grants. And there's certainly lots of grants out there, state and federal grants that can augment existing programs. So you have a more cost-effective community machine going. And I don't know, over my decades of working with coalitions, it can be fun. There can be a sense of community pride and growth and health from that when you've got different partners working together, new people meeting each other, and it sparks new kinds of relationships, professional and community relationships. Yeah, so lots of advantages.
So you mentioned that you've been at this a while. So I'm curious, what is it about this work that you find appealing?
I have to say, I've always been drawn to prevention work and just took to it right away back in the late 70s. And I even wrote my dissertation on all the diverse skills that are needed to serve as a prevention professional. I think that, we're not like some jobs where it's, the same thing again and again. There's so many diverse skills needed for this kind of work. And so that's very intriguing to me. And then applying to prevention to community coalitions can be very empowering to individuals and the community. It can be effective, healthy. It's all positive stuff. And I really like the way things are constantly changing. And I think that adds fun. And like I mentioned before, you can meet different individuals, different groups, learn about your own community. So it's very active. It's an active profession. It's an active work that we're doing in prevention.
Well, you touched upon it. So let's dig into that a little deeper. Changes for coalitions over the years. What's that look like?
Well, certainly the prevention science has changed over the years. Funding has changed. So the sources of funding, the amount of funding. So we prevention providers and community members, we always have to look at collecting data from different sources, really updating our data bank and expanding that. Always having a pulse on new or changing risk factors, like, substance use patterns in the community, and having a pulse on protective factors, what's new and different going on. And an example of that is, families that are currently doing a very good job of keeping their young kids marijuana free, but now that marijuana is coming to the state, that may change. So what was once a protective factor may start eroding, and parents need to be more mindful of their strategies and teachings and, modeling, etc. So that means that, prevention folks and coalitions are always retooling themselves. So there's always a change there. But that may not be new, I guess. Perhaps we've always had to retool ourselves. So, and I guess what's changed over the decades is our challenge to keep prevention and substance abuse services as a priority. in the minds of community members, public leaders, legislators. With the media the way it is, there's always some issue that's kind of grabbing the headlines, and it's going to be sexier or bigger, better, smoother, badder than, substance use and abuse and prevention. So we've got to really sustain our energy and try to keep our substance abuse prevention, intervention, treatment as a priority. So that's always changing. Yeah, so lots of changes.
When it comes to substance use, treatment and recovery garner much of the attention around that issue, and rightfully so. But why does prevention matter?
Yeah. So this is a real brain teaser. This question of yours here, because it's counterintuitive, because on first glance it looks like everybody's using.
Mm-hmm.
There's just problems everywhere. But in reality, the overwhelming majority of people aren't using illegal substances. And of the people who use legal substances like tobacco and alcohol, they don't abuse them. So we actually have more people who can benefit from reinforcement of non-use of illegal substances. Like, why is it they're not using heroin?
Mm-hmm.
Why is that? We need to reinforce what they're doing well. And we need to constantly educate the community about low-risk use of legal substances. So like tobacco and alcohol and medications. So this is going to be a brain teaser for us, again, because marijuana is coming to town. And we're going to have adult use of marijuana be legalized. So as an old prevention provider like me, I have to teach adults low risk marijuana use now.
Yeah.
Like that's just blowing my mind.
Yeah.
It's a good thing I'm retired, in other words. So prevention is really important, because we've got to prevent onset, prevent use among certain populations, because some of the people can use some of the time, but there's also some people who can't use at all any of the time. So some people have medical conditions such that they can never use alcohol, and they're going to have medical conditions such that they can never, use marijuana.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a chunk of people who can't use drugs at all anytime, and some who might be able to use at a low risk way. All of us, if we choose to use, should be low risk. And then there's some people who shouldn't use any of the time. So really with prevention, we try to serve the entire population, universal, indicated, and those high risk folks, the selected and indicated population. So prevention, like I said, serves the entire community, and it can also save money. And some of the research would indicate that for every dollar we spend, we're saving 10, 10 maybe in cost of intervention and treatment, $10 maybe in terms of education and occupation, in terms of preventing loss of life, just the cost of replacing a traffic sign that gets run over by a stoned driver, So we can save money. Prevention providers and coalitions can save the community money. I mean, that's been proven. So prevention matters. Prevention matters in a number of different ways. Although it doesn't seem that way. The squeaky wheel gets the oil. Is that how the saying goes?
Yes.
So, folks needing treatment, yes, right now,
Mm-hmm.
today, this minute. Folks in recovery need support all the time. Yes, no question. Homeless people need a place to sleep. Yes, no question. And we need prevention. So we somehow, as communities, we need to juggle all this.
Well, it's come up briefly in some of your comments so far, so let's just go ahead and get right down to it. Legalization of marijuana in Virginia, scheduled to take place and go into effect July 1. It's an issue that's been heavily debated, obviously, but In a general sense, why should Virginians be concerned about this change that takes effect July 1?
Yeah, this could be a real game changer for our state. It's certainly been, adult use, legalization, commercialization of marijuana has certainly changed many other states. So when I say many, there's a total of 16 states plus District of Columbia. So that's not the majority of states. Certainly, it's not like we've got a landslide going here. So it certainly can be a game changer, though, for Virginia, because this legalizes simple possession of marijuana. So adults in Virginia can carry 1 ounce of marijuana. So that 1 ounce, a quick Google search of how many joints, right, which is basically a marijuana cigarette, 1 ounce of marijuana can basically make about 50 joints. Think about that. Wow. I mean, a pack of cigarettes has 20 smokes in it, right? So 50 joints, to me, is a lot. To me, that's dealing. That looks like dealing to me, but that's legal in Virginia for adults, 21 and over. Then adults can have up to 4 marijuana plants they can grow. So when you think, again, this is a simple Google search. In several websites. So I'm just averaging out these little websites. So one plant can produce about 80 ounces. So 4 plants I grow in my house, that's 4,000 joints.
Wow.
To me, that's mass production. That's a cottage industry. In the time of a recession in our state, a recession around the galaxy because of COVID-19, we have our state brilliant legislators. Whoops, you can edit that one out if you want. We've got a cottage industry now of people growing marijuana. Then this new law, Senate Bill 1406, says that you can't have the plants within sight of, say, the street or your neighbors, and you have to secure it from young people in your house, right? The under 21. So how well are we applying that to our guns, to our medication, to our alcohol, all of which cannot be around young people, our tobacco products? So, I mean, we haven't learned from other challenging, potentially lethal issues. And pediatric poisoning is certainly a huge issue in states that have adult use, legalized marijuana. So these are some of the challenges we're faced with here. As I understand this bill, though, it's very confusing because right now people can't bring marijuana seeds into the state. So I don't know how they're going to grow these plants.
Yeah.
So it's almost like the legislators are assuming there's going to be some kind of illicit trade, right? So the law says that I can't trade you, I can't sell my marijuana plants to you or my grow from you, but there are certain things I might be able to gift to you. So that's tricky. And the other tricky thing, I think, as a preventionist, is that for under 21 would get slapped with a minimal charge, like $25 for possession, first offense. So that could be nothing. My teenager grows, marijuana in the house and says it's mine. There's all kinds of tricky pieces to this. So there's going to be a huge learning curve in Virginia. There's also no limit set on the amount of tetrahydrocannabinol, which is you and your listeners may know is the most psychoactive part of the marijuana plant. I mean, there's hundreds of different chemicals in a marijuana plant. Mm-hmm. And there could be thousands depending if I use some kind of chemical to, what's it called, like an accelerant to grow quicker, like a fertilizer type thing. And that gets into a whole new problem with kind of poisons and poisoning the environment, etc. So there's no limit now on the amount of tetrahydrocannabinol in the marijuana that we can sell at these stores once they get up and running. And there's no limit to what I could grow at my house, how I could manufacture. And marijuana is a really sneaky, conniving, brilliant plant. It has trained us humans to grow it in optimal conditions. So in return, it rewards us with a more accelerated high, a euphoria from it. So that's the benefit of a marijuana plant, is the high. That's why people would use it. But there's all kinds of unintended negative consequences from that plant, and I can talk about those in a second as well. So we have all these kinks and quirks as we're setting about, to launch July 1, and then the state has said that it wants to start these other sort of boards or authorities to oversee this. So just as a rundown, we have the Virginia Cannabis Control Authority, which is going to be under Homeland Security. We're going to have the Cannabis Oversight Committee, the Cannabis Public Health Advisory Committee, the Cannabis Equity Reinvestment Board and Fund, and the Virginia Cannabis Equity Business Loan Program and Fund. So that's a lot of infrastructure that needs to get set up before, as I understand the bill, and the bill's only, over 250 pages or something.
Right.
So, and I've scanned it 3 times. So yes, I need to learn a lot more. But that's 5 different agencies, boards, authorities that need to get up and running before some of these stores can start to sell. So that's a lot of work that has to be done. And you'll notice from the titles on some of those, the emphasis on the state legislators is for equity. And most of this equity is for racial justice because of the unequal ways that African Americans and other Americans of color have been targeted by the drug war. So I just think, the state hasn't put enough time into addressing health issues for everyone. And there are other ways, certainly, we could address, racial equity that wouldn't compromise the health risks to all our community members. We desperately need equity, and we desperately need health, especially in the time of recovering from COVID and a major pandemic. And we need to bolster our economy. However, those states that have legalized adult use marijuana have not seen the great increase to their state budgets that were initially promised. So it seems to me that legislators are taking more instructions from the marijuana industry and from the community who would want to legalize marijuana. And the state has not given enough time to really see any benefits from decriminalizing marijuana, which would have provided more equity, I think, to all citizens. So when they decriminalized, then we went into a lockdown with the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
So we really haven't seen it, what that could have, how that could have helped us all. So the state still needs to work out all the labeling instructions, how they're going to monitor these stores. We tend not to use the word recreation because it makes it seem like a soft drug, and we know marijuana isn't a soft drug, especially due to higher levels of tetrahydrocannabinol. There could be reports of some psychiatric effects that are beyond just that high I talked about with high levels of THC. There can be panic attacks, seizures, psychosis, this sense of extreme intoxication, suicidal thoughts, and what they call acute cannabinoid catatonia, which is a fancy word of saying somebody gets so chilled they sit in their chair for about 4 hours and can't move. So just, also with high levels of THC, there can be some very severe breathing problems. It's called cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome. And this can actually send people to the emergency departments because they get vomiting, they get nauseous, and their stomach cramps. So, and they can't stop for a while. So this is that hyperemesis thing. So they just can't stop the vomiting from happening. and the cramping. So that's from these super high levels of THC. Back in when many grandparents around Virginia may have tried marijuana back in the 60s and early 70s, marijuana was 3, 4, 5, maybe 7% THC. Now it's 30, 40, and there have even been some reports of 90% tetrahydrocannabinol.
Wow.
So that's like drinking grain alcohol, is 90% grain alcohol and just a dab of kind of water to water it down.
Yeah.
Whereas beer, has, what is beer? 12% alcohol and lots of water to kind of water it down, to dilute it, in other words. So we've got some pretty severe potential reactions, and no guarantees we're going to make the tax income. No guarantees that young people won't have access, because we know young people have access to tobacco products and alcohol products and other illicit drugs. We have no guarantees that marijuana won't make it into the high schools, into the workforce. We need to constantly check for that. So schools are going to need to update their policies and procedures, as will the business working community. We now conduct roadside sobriety tests for alcohol, and there's no quick, easy way to test for marijuana intoxication. We don't have the technology like a breathalyzer. So the police officers can look at your pupils of your eyes. They can ask questions. They can give you kind of a roadside sobriety test in terms of walking or answering questions. But if somebody has a high tolerance, they might pass those questions and still be quite stoned from the marijuana. So we may see a surge in traffic crashes, an increase in our insurance. There could be changes. Here's an interesting thing. I live in Virginia Beach, and I've been talking to our city council and Better Business Bureau about the potential changes to tourism here. So folks in other tourist heavy areas may need to think about that, because we may become a tourist destination with all our historical sites, our amusement parks, our beautiful mountains like you have up there, our ocean front. So, folks may be in the Washington, D.C. area, purchase marijuana there, come down to Virginia, keep using, and purchase here. So we may become a marijuana tourist destination, just like Colorado was years ago. So, and the data would show from these other states that just because they have legalized marijuana and home grows doesn't mean that, crime is down or that unregulated cultivation is down. There's still, trafficking and some of that. So North Carolina and West Virginia, other states need to look at how the marijuana could be grown in Virginia and then transported out of Virginia. So the challenge to our legislators is, and I guess to us too, because we can get involved in this discussion, I suppose, they have yet to vote on what's called reenactment. So that'll be coming up in either, unless there's a special session called, or the next General Assembly. So they can kind of change their minds about this. Then, we can hopefully talk to them about opting out, giving locales such as yours the option to not allow it to be sold. And while I'm on that topic, let me just add that in Colorado, the last I checked in Colorado, only 4 counties in all of Colorado, that's been a legal state for 10 years, right?
Right.
4 counties are selling marijuana. 96%, let's say there are 100 counties, 96% have opted out of selling marijuana in Colorado.
I did not know that.
It's supposed to be such a wonder drug, bringing all this money, right? Most areas, the overwhelming majority of areas in Colorado, will not allow marijuana to be sold there. So legislators may say one thing about our state, but we would like the ability in our communities to say, we choose not to. We choose our own school board. There's a lot of choices we have locally that adds our individuality and our our local stamp on things. So also in some of these other states, the policing is still the same. So people of color are still getting arrested at the same disproportionate rate, even though people of color aren't using marijuana more than Caucasians. So why are police targeting them? So we need to change our police strategies. I think we need to reconsider marijuana. We just aren't ready here in Virginia, and we need to take local control. So that's a little bit, sorry, I'm long-winded on that, but that's a little bit about the overview on this bill and the potential negative consequences of the bill and, the challenges going forward for all of us.
Well, Dr. Crozier, I would say with everything that you've just outlined, it's fair for us to acknowledge that in Virginia we have obviously put the cart before the horse when it comes to marijuana legalization.
Yeah.
There's still a lot that obviously we're going to have to work through as communities to address this. But I wanted to ask you, for folks who are listening that are concerned about the very things that you just mentioned, what can they do to help combat this or address it?
Well, thank you. That's a good question. Yeah, I tend to be more hopeful about this. I think there are some things we can do. I think that families can talk. They can set expectations for not using marijuana, not growing marijuana. Neighbors can talk, and say this, we're going to watch out for each other's kids. We're going to watch out for each other's family. Parents can talk to the school personnel and community leaders, a way to get prepared. I've called, our police here, said, how are you going to manage roadside sobriety tests? How are you going to check for marijuana? And they assured me, yes. So I'm going to hold them to that, So, we need to talk to our schools again about expanding the marijuana education in all middle and high school grades. Right now we cover substances in certain health classes and might skip a grade. But when you have a new substance like this rolling out and that people have such familiarity with it, and there's so many jokes about marijuana is seen as a soft drug, which, to be honest with you, I would take points off a student's paper if they called marijuana soft and heroin hard, because these are all substances. They're potentially very dangerous to an individual who uses it and to others around them, like, these unintended consequences of driving or affecting a developing fetus, if a pregnant woman uses it. And so we live in community. There are ripple effects, we're not an island. What I do affects others. So we need, like, as I mentioned, talking to schools, we can talk to, and these are our neighbors. All these, the law enforcement, our legislators, they're our neighbors. They all work for us and with us. So talking to legislators about our concerns. So they just start with that. Legislators like personal stories. They like hearing from moms and dads and grandparents. They've heard me talking and they think, oh, she's just a loudmouth academic here, So I'm talking statistics, whereas your community members can, speak from their hearts and speak from concerns and talk about all these mixed messages that the law is sending. It's just so confusing. So they can ask their legislators to vote no on legalizing or commercializing. So we can ask for that opt-out clause, like I was talking about, opt out of selling marijuana locally. We can encourage legislators to set a limit on the amount of THC to make sure they have adequate funding. So they're going to check these stores, the marijuana stores, and because we're going to need, just like we behavioral health conducts the tobacco checks now, right? I forget the name of that. There's a special name for that program.
Counter tools.
Yes, counter tools. So we need a counter tools for marijuana products, and of course, we always have something for the alcohol sales. The agents going to the sellers and servers. We need to encourage all our local leaders just to collect data. I've talked to legislators about this. There is no definitive statewide data now. So different behavioral health centers, different schools have been collecting as the money has been available. So to your point about, the cart before the horse, we don't have adequate baseline data in the state to see how legalization is going to influence us. And we need to keep reminding legislators and community leaders that these kind of laws, this marijuana legalization law, doesn't have the support of professional groups like the American Medical Association, College of Pediatrics, AAA, all kind. And we're still fighting a pandemic, a recession, and as I mentioned, the decriminalization has yet to be fully tested. So there's a lot of ways we can begin conversations, that we can share our knowledge with others and hold some of those community representatives and legislators to task. They are in their positions to protect the community and to make the community better and not to hurt the community members. So,
and I think one thing that some folks might not consider or not be aware of is that big tobacco is indeed lurking in the shadows behind all of this.
Oh, good point. Yes, indeed. I agree with you. I totally agree with you. And, and big alcohol, because alcohol is now, there are some alcohol products that are being infused with THC. So we've got the tobacco companies want to get into this train, the alcohol companies, and I would suggest also that the marijuana industry is learning from the tobacco playbook, in terms of really minimizing the negative side effects of marijuana, of promoting it, of using money to influence legislators. So it's good points, all good points. Thank you.
Let's just talk about addiction and substance use disorders in general, and the impact it has on our society and our communities. We lose thousands of fellow Americans each year, about 90,000, close to it, last year alone from reported overdoses. Do you have hope that we can reverse this trend?
Well, in some ways I have to admit I'm encouraged by the recent litigation against, this was maybe 20 years ago, against the tobacco industry.
Mm-hmm.
So, and tobacco use has been decreasing, so that's good. There is current litigation against Purdue Pharma and the Sackler family over the opioid epidemic and the OxyContin epidemic. So that's very encouraging. The challenge, though, is it's kind of a whack-a-mole game, as we try to confront two drugs, and there's yet another one. Marijuana now is surfacing in our state big time. So that's a challenge. Citizens are learning more about brain chemistry. Kids in school they have these health classes, they're learning about the underpinnings, the biopsychosocial aspects of addiction, how addiction can cause changes in the brain. So there's a growing sense of compassion towards people with addictions. And there's a expansion of treatment services. The flip side, though, is it's like I say, like this whack-a-mole game. And we're in a recession now, so the services could be slightly reduced or compromised, and we might not be fully up to staff. So we may have lost some of our clients and some of our momentum with our prevention services. So then another challenge is it seems like we really haven't learned from what we experienced with the explosion of tobacco and oxycodone and alcohol products. We're promoting this new product, or we're going to be promoting this new product onto citizens, and I don't think legislators have thought of all the potential guidelines, like will there be billboards advertising marijuana, like there were for tobacco and alcohol products, still are for alcohol products. Will there be TV commercials, and radio commercials? So how far are we going to go with all this? So again, that's the whack-a-mole. So you think, okay, we've got this great prevention program for marijuana, and then somebody comes up with, a new way of promoting or a difference or a change. So we've got to be forever vigilant and always. But so far, I'm somewhat hopeful. Yes, thank you. Good question.
So, with everything that we've talked about today, I was wondering if you might have some suggested resources, websites, books, what have you, that you could recommend to our listeners.
So certainly, yeah. Listeners can visit the Community Coalitions of Virginia website. Just type in those letters and it'll pop up. They can also visit the Community Anti-Drug Coalitions of America. We say it CADCA website. So those are good websites about statewide and then national coalitions. If someone's already in a coalition and wants to look at ways of improving, they can go to the Community Toolbox website, and that's hosted by the University of Kansas. And that's just real nuts and bolts, how to fundraise, how to conduct media work, how to promote leadership. So that's real nuts and bolts for any kind of coalition, not just substance abuse prevention. And then certainly there are some federal sites, the Center for Substance Abuse Prevention, and that's out of the Substance Abuse Mental Health Services Administration, SAMHSA, that's all federal. And for marijuana-specific information, they can go to our wonderful Smart Approaches to Marijuana website. And that group, Smart Approaches to Marijuana, SAM, is really laser focused on marijuana and legislation and consulting with coalitions. So SAM helps Secova a lot. And they're great speakers, great resource, amazing powerhouse. It's an international powerhouse. But they're located in Northern Virginia. Yeah, our neighbors.
I actually just got a copy of their latest book, Smokescreen.
Yes. Yeah, excellent. That's excellent. Yeah, we should have all our libraries buy that book and the first book he wrote.
Yes.
The first book is very good as well.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'll include links to all of those in our show notes for today's episode.
Okay.
So last but not least, of course, any parting words of wisdom to share with our listeners?
Well, lots of words. I don't know about the wisdom part here. But anyway, well, keeping a sense of humor, I guess. Yeah.
That's important.
It can be overwhelming, but I think it's important to remain open to new research. Who knows? We may learn a lot more about this cannabis plant, and we're not going to be smoking it because we know smoke products hurt our lungs and the environment. So there may be something else that's going to show us to be effective. And then it won't be called marijuana, so it'll be called something else. So we need to be open, we need to be tenacious and, really keep drilling home these, the research that we have, drilling it into people's heads, and continue to reach out and collaborate with all kinds of new partners. So keep learning, keep adapting. I know, decades ago, I would never have been working with police. Behavioral health, mental health, substance abuse was way over on one side of the continuum, and police were on another side. And now we're all collaborating. So we need to keep looking at new partners and making sure that our message is culturally competent and relevant to all groups. And so the good news is that prevention works and coalitions work. So we need to constantly, look at the science and how to keep improving that. So, yeah, that's a good question. Yeah.
Well, I think there were some great parting words, so thank you for those.
Yeah, thanks, Mike.
Dr. Crozier, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you today. Appreciate you sharing your insight with us, and we covered a lot of turf today.
Whew, yeah. I can get wordy. Yeah, as a retired academic, I'm used to having a whole half a day to lecture. So thank you for all the questions, Mike, and thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely, and would love to have you back on the show at some point.
Okay, thank you. Good luck with your coalitions.
Thanks so much. Okay, gang, so if you just listened to my conversation with Dr. Crozier, you already know that adult use of marijuana will become legalized in Virginia beginning July 1st. But, as you may have also heard, legalization isn't as simple as it may sound. That's why prevention coalitions from throughout the Roanoke and New River valleys have teamed up with community coalitions of Virginia to educate the public about what's included and what isn't included in the new law. Join us live on Thursday, June 24th from 7 to 8:30 p.m. to get the facts about marijuana legalization in Virginia. Our panel of experts will explain the bill itself and also share information about how this could potentially impact our communities. This event is being streamed live by WDBJ7 with veteran reporter Joe DeShiel serving as moderator. The live stream will be available at WDBJ7.com, on the WDBJ7 Facebook page, and via the WDBJ7 News app. Feel free to submit your questions in advance to info@nrvcs.org, and don't forget to join us live on June 24th at 7 p.m. We hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Dissect and Connect podcast. To learn more about Montgomery County Prevention Partners, our New River Valley Community Services, be sure to check us out on Facebook or visit nrvcs.org/podcast.